Good morning, everyone. Let me just quickly check to see that my audio, yes, it should be. Oh, let's do Yeti. Okay, there we go. Now everything's Yeti. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this Tuesday morning, at least for me? So today, what I wanted to start, exactly where we're starting. So today, what I wanted to talk about was consulting. Again, if you missed the prior one, we talked about getting clients, so how you can get clients different ways, kind of find clients. We talked about some of the pros and cons. And one of the other questions that comes up a lot that I want to discuss here, and also feel free to ask questions, is pricing. A lot of people also ask, how much should I charge for my service? Everyone's always wondering, should it be the same that I'm getting paid currently? Should I charge more? I think when you're first starting out, I think the first problem you'll always need to solve is not how much should you charge, but how much of anything, but where do clients come from? So that's always what I'd like to think in kind of your journey of consulting is step one is first get clients. And then once you start getting a few, then you can start thinking about pricing. So essentially, pricing is how you will end up positioning your service, so to speak. So how you price says a lot of what you offer. And so if you are charging a premium, it can mean a lot and people expect a lot. So I think it's kind of nice when you first start consulting, to not charge as much as possible in terms of trying to make a ton of money, but charging maybe the same rate that you're making it work, so that way, if you make a mistake or if things aren't perfect, because you're still learning how to be a good consultant, you aren't stressed out by the fact you may be charging $20,000, $30,000 a month to someone. So it's a little bit nicer to charge maybe hourly, and then at the same time charge hourly plus not as a high rate as you could. I think that's something that's nice. It's the same thing that people say with YouTube. It's kind of nice not to have anyone following you immediately, so you can kind of learn how to make better videos. And the same thing kind of goes with consulting. When you're first figuring out your rates, it's nice to charge a little bit less. Yeah, and I'll answer that question here in a second. It's nice to charge a little bit less just upfront. And then the other question was pointed out here, isn't charging per project more wise and ideal than charging per hour? Also, yes, long term, like once you start getting familiar with your projects, the ideal situation is to charge per project, not per hour. I think this takes some time to understand what that means, right? Like maybe there's a few types of projects you can kind of gauge ahead of time. Like maybe you've got like a clear audit or something where you're like, all right, I think this will take me X amount of time. I don't mind, putting some risk and taking a little bit of the risk on my side by saying it'll take me so long to finish. So I'm just going to charge whatever the number is, $10,000. But I think when you're early on in your career, like knowing how much you're going to charge is hard. So it can kind of be good to do a few things. One, charge maybe a little less than you would. And then two, charge by hour, just because you kind of have to figure it out. Try to guess the hours. I usually always try to guess like, okay, how many hours will it take? Because people still want to know the final number. Doing the project and charging it by the project is a little bit harder if you haven't done a lot of projects. But once you've done a few projects, once you have a few examples under your belt, that's when you can start being like, okay, I should be making about 2 to 3 times of my current rate wherever you're working at, whatever company you're at. And you want to start looking at, hey, can I charge by project, right? That's the other side of this. Like, can I charge, if I do an audit or if I do this 30, 60, 90-day project that I've kind of outlined? How much is it worth to the client? That's when you start discussing things like value versus hourly rate. Usually this is because, like, let's say a client values you doing a project at $100,000, but it's only going to take you 50 hours or 100 hours, and it's like, okay, well, that might be a crazy number if you put an hourly rate behind that, and they'll look at that and go, that seems really expensive. But when things are put into perspective of value and put in perspective of, hey, for this project, I charge whatever, 50K in general, regardless of the hours it takes. If they value what you're offering, they'll then say yes. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of switch the conversation from hourly, because most people who are accustomed to the concept of hourly kind of have a cap where they think it's a little weird to pay someone more than a certain amount per hour, to value, where it's like, hey, this type of project, this is what I charge. That's really the goal most consultants try to get to, because that's when you can, again, separate yourself from hourly and start essentially making more. Again, it's kind of nice to get there slowly if you're running towards that, and not learning why people want to pay you more and what value to deliver. When you start doing those types of projects, it puts you at a lot of risk, because you might not deliver things correctly. You might make mistakes. I always think about this one example I had early on, where it was the first project we basically charged $100,000 for. So this was me and a partner at the time, and we had to hire someone to help us because it was a big project. And you realize, you're like, well, if I make a mistake here, right, I still have to pay the person that I've hired to do this work, and maybe this client will be upset and sue me or do something where I have to give back the money, and then I still had to pay that person, so I lost money. So it was one of those times where it's like, getting big projects and positioning yourself to get big projects is good, but there's a lot of risk there. Let's see, how much money do you need to start a consulting company? In terms of how much money, right? Like with consulting, whatever it costs is put together a business, and then usually people recommend you have some sort of emergency fund, right? Like, but other than that, it doesn't like cost all that much money to start a consulting company. It's a pro and con of consulting, right? Like there's borderline no costs. Unless you're paying someone. If you're doing more of an agency model, then you probably want a little money because you've got to pay someone else to do the work. But if you're doing the work, the only thing it costs is your time and your ability to get clients. So technically, consulting companies, minus again setting up the LLC or whatever type of company you're doing, is free technically. The only thing it costs is your time. But there are recommendations to have an emergency fund, because if you don't get clients for a few months, you will want to have a little money put away. But yeah, otherwise it's really just free, just your time. Hypothetically, when you're charging 20K, these projects go on for months, right? I mean, that would depend, right? You can easily, like, there are projects that maybe you're charging $20,000 a month for. I know I was talking to another consultant who has an agency. He's got a few people that work with him. And he doesn't like to do projects that are less than 15 to 20K a month, because he's got to hire, he likes putting 2 or 3 people on a project. So he doesn't do projects that are smaller than that. There are plenty of projects that, will be more than that. But it also probably depends, where in the world you're doing this project. How did you start? Any tips for starting without leaving the day job at the beginning? Yeah, so I honestly did what I would call side hustle consulting for almost 5 years, maybe more, maybe less. It was really just how I did it. When I first started, it was because an individual came to me and asked me, like, hey, can you help with a project? We had worked together at a company. They wanted me to help on a project. So I set up an LLC and started doing the work. I think at the time I may or may not have told my employer. I think I may have, just like, oh, hey, this person contacted me. Some employers are fine with that as long as it's very part-time and not another job. Usually most employers are kind of okay with that, because it's like, okay, well, this is just a quick project. So I just started putting out more content and started reaching out to people to try to get clients. And so I just do like the one-off projects here and there. There generally shouldn't be an issue, especially if it's just one here and there. You can kind of just take on some small projects. The big thing again there is getting clients is the harder part. Which is what this next, hey, how do you get clients for consultancies? I did put together a video on this a while ago, and I'll be hopefully putting out a fuller video at some point, just because this is a whole topic in itself. So I'll talk about that at some point. Hi, how do I know if my experience skill level is ready for starting a data consulting business? I think this kind of goes back to like pricing in terms of like how much do you charge? Probably as long as you've been doing consulting or not consulting, some data work for the last 2 or 3 years, you can probably do some form of either consulting or contracting work for most companies, at least in like the SMB, small, medium business range. Because honestly, most companies would be happy to, increase their abilities to work with data, and most companies are still considerably far behind. So you don't need like the fanciest or most in-depth knowledge of data to just get started, but you won't likely charge as much. So you're kind of balancing out your growth where it's like, okay, I'll charge maybe what I'm making in my company, maybe a little less, just so I can get a few examples under my belt, and maybe my skills aren't perfect, but it'll give me a chance to practice and learn how to get better. And that way, everyone's kind of winning in this deal. You're learning to be a better consultant. They're getting some service, but you're learning how to do some of those services along the way. So if you've got at least something that you feel is unique and a skill set that maybe some people need, it's worth testing out. Like why not try out a project and see like, hey, do you like it? Do you not like it? Are you able to deliver what people are asking? You're going to be learning along the way a little bit. There's always a little bit of learning in consulting, regardless. What was your first gig? Was it building a dashboard or pipelines or churn or modeling? No, it was honestly migrating someone from an Access, you could call it a data warehouse, I guess, an Access data warehouse of sorts, to a SQL Server data warehouse. Yeah, it was pretty funny, right? Like we're talking about some technologies that probably most people don't rely on that heavily anymore. Actually, now I think about it, it's been like 7 years for me consulting. So yeah, it was very funny. They were trying to do some analytics, and it was just really slow. It was very, very slow. As you can imagine, if you're using Access, like a select query would take 10 minutes. So yeah, like we moved them to a SQL Server, did some indexes, things like that. And then yeah, I guess we created some dashboards off of that. But yeah, it was the main project was honestly just migrating them onto a more sustainable system. Yeah, it was very funny. Yeah. Also, feel free to keep asking questions. Yeah, I think again with the pricing side, it really is kind of funny that way. Just because a lot of people want to like feel like they should have 10 years of experience or 20 years of experience in a field, but I think it's kind of nice to start again doing some sort of side hustle consulting, and then eventually build up to more and more complex projects. So when you're doing side hustle consulting, maybe it's as simple as doing some basic Excel work, or building a basic dashboard in Tableau, where it's not like you need crazy skills to do it, but you could still add a lot of value to companies that don't have those abilities. Yeah, it'll be more likely mom and pop shops, and it's a pretty good place to be, and then you don't charge as much, and then everyone kind of wins. That's how I think another kind of thing that kind of happens is you'll notice that consultants at different sizes don't like to take on certain projects. So it kind of naturally creates this step or stairway or levels where as you grow, you'll find projects because the previous consultants that were taking on those size projects will no longer take on those size projects because like they've kind of grown, and then they're like, we don't want to take this, a few $100s a month project. We want to take on a $5,000 a month project. We don't want to take a $5,000 a month project. We want to take a $20,000 a month project. So you kind of naturally just grow. Because some people don't want to take on these projects. It's not worth for them to take on 10 3K projects because they're taking on one $30,000 project. It's a far better ROI for them because they can deliver at that level. So there's kind of this natural stair step. As you get better, you'll start just saying no to certain projects because, why would you take on an extra $3,000 when you're like, no, I'm looking for the next $30,000 project. So it's kind of this interesting dynamic here. So that's why like new consulting companies can always come in. It's why I don't think I mind encouraging people to join consulting, because it's going to take a few years for people to get comfortable. And someone needs to take on projects at different sizes, and everyone kind of grows. So, well, I'm trying to think. trying to see what this is. My project was supposed to last till the end of March, creating pipeline. I'm curious what this means. My project was supposed to last until till the end of March, though I finished it in 16 hours through AI. What is the future of consulting? I'd be curious to know what your project was. I think it depends. Is it contracting? Is it consulting? Were you just trying to write some code? Because I think that I need some of those details. I think the other side of consulting is you often become this expert for people. For example, one of the recent projects I've taken on is around helping a client essentially. First, it was like analyzing their product. And then after analyzing the product, they've kind of gone from there. Where now they're looking for strategic advice from me, for positioning, for things like that. And that kind of helped happen through different steps, where it was like going through the process, giving them advice about their product. New challenges came up. They're like, okay, we need more advice. New challenges came up, and then we need more advice. You become kind of this trusted advisor to some degree. So that's why it's like, okay, AI can do some of that, but it's not going to become this person that people trust, I guess. Maybe, to some degree, but we're still people, and I think we still like relationships. I think that's a hard part to replace. Someday we probably will replace it with AI, but it'll be a sad day when our relationships are all people or all computers. Let's see. Hi, I'm working as a data engineer, and I have some freelance work. Also, now I'm thinking to do freelance for full, and will try to start my own consulting company. Is this the correct path? Yeah, I think, this is, the thing about freelance work is, one, how much are you making? Do you need to make a certain amount of money per month? Doing it full time can be great, but there's definitely some risks, right? There's definitely a feast and famine cycle, right, for some consultants, depending on how good you are getting clients. And even if you're really good at getting clients, there might just be a time that you don't have for a month or two. And are you in a situation where that is okay, right? Like for me, it's like if I don't get clients for a few months, it's not the end of the world. I have other things I like doing. I have other random streams of income, whether it be YouTube, whether it be writing. So I can always have my baseline met, and I'm always fine. I don't have to go into my savings. But that's usually the biggest risk, keeping clients going. Keeping clients going. I think that was something that happened with me. From my first consulting project was like, wow, I made just as much this month as I made last month in my basically consulting. So I'm like, oh, I should just do this full time. So it was kind of this interesting, what do you call it? Kind of this interesting realization overall. So, you just need to be ready, I think, in that regard to take on that possible risk of not making money for a month or two. And as long as that's fine with you, or 3, then maybe. But yeah, that's the kind of risk. How do you know? Oh, here. How do you navigate, negotiating deliverables and timeline in the uncertainty of a client's legacy environment? So, this is where a lot of, honestly, consultancies make their money, is by like generalizing, like being very clear on what their scope is. Being like, hey, this is what we're going to deliver. Here's how we're going to do it. If anything happens that's outside of this norm, we're going to charge you for it. So yeah, like there's definitely environments that you go into that like you're like, hey, I can't know everything, and if it takes longer than what I'm saying, we're going to add an amendment. We're going to charge you more. So a lot of projects, this is why you'll see projects that will start at like, we're talking about big projects like $10 million and end up at like 20 million, because, it's just way too hard to know everything you're going to need to do overall. So it's kind of this interesting situation to be in. Is there a way to identify the clients that are risks of not paying? So first of all, like when you're getting paid by clients, I always recommend taking a down payment before starting work. Whether that's half, whether that's whatever, it makes me feel better. For the first month, I charge generally by month, that I get paid at least half upfront, or at least half for that month. It's usually like, so let's say if it's like 3 months, I'm charging $20K per month. $10K of that is paid upfront as a down payment. It makes me feel better, again, because I know they can pay me. They've got a method of paying me. One of the things that I've had a client not pay me, so I'll tell you the very obvious thing that ends up happening is, hey, if a client that has an AP, so a billing, like they have a billing accountant or someone that should be handling the finances, misses your deadline, that's concerning, right? Like that should be a red flag because they have someone that should be doing this work. Don't get me wrong, there's unorganized companies, people won't pay you on time. But if that happens, right? Like if that happens, you stop work. Like that's just kind of one of the ways you do it. You're like, hey, I haven't been paid by the deadline that I told you were supposed to pay me by. I can't work. Like I'm not going to keep doing work. This isn't, to me, this isn't funny. Like I'm not getting paid. You stop work at that point. You say, hey, I'm not getting paid. Pay me up front or pay me what I'm owed essentially. That at least puts pressure on them, regardless of if they can pay you or not, to pay you. And again, you should be getting a down payment at the very least. And that's why I'll always take that up front. And then some people do different terms. Like some people will do 15-day terms, which just means I get paid. Like I'll send you an invoice and 15 days later I get paid or we have a conversation. Some people do 30. I like 15. I think I'm starting to move to 15 more too, just because it's like, it makes sure that there's pressure, because otherwise, when you think about it, you'll do your work for a month, and then you won't get paid for 30 days after that month if you have a 30-day term. So it's a little bit silly in that regard. So yeah, there are some signs, like often if they're constantly missing deadlines, if they're talking about financing, like if they're talking about like, oh, hey, we're trying to get some banks to get us some money. It's like, why? Why are you going to the bank for money? Shouldn't you be going to your clients, or not your clients, your customers for money? Aren't you a business? Aren't you a successful business doing, making money? So yeah. To understand the depth of consulting, what are the deliverables usually? Obviously, I'll give a few examples, but I'll start with it depends on the project. I've done a few different projects, and so the deliverables have changed for each of those. When it's kind of like setting up someone's data stack from scratch, right? Like obviously the deliverables, the very end deliverable is some sort of like dashboard, MVP, something on that side, right? Throughout that time, you'll be delivering like tables and data pipelines and things like that. But for me, it's always important to deliver some sort of dashboard because, especially as a data engineer, our work is very ethereal. It's like, it's a table somewhere. It exists. That provides zero value to companies if they can't see how to use it. So giving an example dashboard is kind of the end all be all deliverable, or a report or something that they can kind of see and touch and feel. So that's something that like is the end goal. Throughout that process, I'll usually be doing some sort of documentation to kind of track the process that I have over that time period. This will be like, in the first 30 days, it'll be some sort of like, hey, here's an update of where I think we should go and what your data infrastructure should look like and the decisions I've made throughout that process. Similar thing at 60 days, but it's more of like an update of the actual process we've put into place, the data pipelines we've put into place, the infrastructure, things like that. All of this is meant to kind of build trust and be like, hey, we're making progress. Here's an update. It's about constantly kind of keeping that client in the loop, because that's what makes a lot of clients happy. Otherwise, they kind of feel a little bit stressed out that they're like, hey, is this person that I'm paying a lot of money for delivering? And they won't always like bug you about it, which I found interesting at first. Was they'll often keep it to themselves, and it won't come out until later that they're like, hey, are you working on anything? And it'll be like 3 or 4 weeks and you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm working on things. Of course I'm working on things. So yeah, just usually at least 30, 60, 90 days, you have kind of some sort of deliverable that keeps them up to date on where things are at each of those points. This was funny. You've got a lot of questions. How do you handle disagreement with clients are not technically literate about data? Generally, so I have had honestly really good clients for the most part. I think I'm trying to think. Most of the issues that I've run into with clients have been like, oh, they want to do something from scratch, and I'm like, well, we have a solution that can do it. It costs like $10 a month. It's basically free. If you pay me, I'm going to charge you $10,000 to build this thing, or we could just use this thing that's $10 a month and it's free. essentially in that world. And the way I've kind of handled that, just build an example and be like, hey, I've already built this example. It does 80% of what you need. Let's just give it the last 20%, and then you don't have to pay me $10,000 a month to do this work. So I'm always, those are usually the disagreements I run into. Is like, hey, do we need this thing that you think you need, or is it a different solution altogether? So just reframing people and trying to show them value in other places. The only other place, I'm trying to think, I haven't had any major disagreements. Again, very lucky. I've seen other clients, like I've subcontracted under people who had disagreements, and I was like, wow, this is a totally different world. I don't know where my clients come from, but they're always generally pretty happy. Yeah, not just with the work, just in general. They're just, always genuine people, which has been nice. How can I niche down and choose a specific service that I could offer if I'm just starting out? I wouldn't run too fast towards niching down. Like, pick a general niche. Sure, yeah, do that. But don't be like, okay, I only do whatever fraud detection in finance for insurance companies that are in the Midwest or something. That could eventually be where you niche down, because you can make a ton of money, because the more you niche down, you can kind of, charge a little more of a premium. But you might not know where you want to niche down. Honestly, when I first started, I was like, oh, I want to do data science consulting. So I did a ton of data science content, tried reaching out to a ton of people in that space. And a lot of the work that came my way was data engineering, which is what I was anyway. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll niche down this way instead. And so, some of niching down, I think you'll learn over time. Oh, you weren't asking a silly question. Sorry, I'm just going. Dipesh, you weren't asking a silly question. Totally good questions. I said you asked. Oh, you had a lot of questions, which I'm happy to answer. So thanks for keeping the chat lively. How do you prioritize tasks and manage your workload when working with multiple clients? So I think the big thing that you'll learn as a consultant when you're trying to manage multiple tasks is don't have deliverables due the same day. That's the biggest thing, I think, because your deliverables tend to set the tone and set the pace of your work. And if you set too many deliverables on one day, maybe you need an extra night to work on things. So making sure that those are the most spaced out, I think is one of the more important things. It's like, as long as you're spaced out, your deliverables aren't all at once, it's generally okay. And yeah, you should have some general understanding of how to prioritize and things like that. I think I've only had one client where they constantly push me, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll deliver that, maybe 3 days from now or 4 days from now. And like, why not tomorrow? It's like, well, I've got something else I need to deliver, but I'll make it happen if it really needs to happen. But overall, you should try not to have that happen, because just, I personally can really only focus on one or two things at a time, like delivering things. Like, maybe you can kind of have multiple things going on in the background work-wise, and kind of be slowly finishing them, but to really bring them to that fruition, for me, needs a little more focus. Yeah, generally, I do post these lives on the channel, so feel free to kind of, come back later. What level of cold calling, emailing did you initially invest in? What did those conversations and emails look like? So I'm not the greatest salesperson in the world. Like my if you want to call it superpower, and the thing that I'm kind of working on helping other people kind of find when they're doing want to become consulting, is their kind of superpower. My superpower at getting clients is not cold calling, or instead it's marketing, right? Like you on my LinkedIn, on my YouTube, on writing blogs, across all of that, I probably get over 1 million views a month on all of my content. Actually, way more than that because of LinkedIn. But if you talk about properties that I own, so well, I guess you don't own YouTube, but YouTube, blog, Substack, on those properties, I probably get somewhere in that range. So that's kind of my superpower. That's the way I get clients. There are people who are, and I tested out cold calling and cold emailing, I guess. And I just never was really good at targeting. I've seen some people who are really good at targeting with cold emailing, because part of it, I think, is you kind of have to target who you're cold emailing. You kind of have to have some idea. You can do the massive spray and pray, like just email thousands of people, buy a contact list or a lead list and email 1,000 people and just be like, maybe one of these people will need my services, which is what I tried. It generally doesn't work that well. Whereas I've seen people have a lot more tailored approaches to this. Like they're like, hey, I know that if I reach out to a CMO or a CFO, I know exactly what to tell them. I know exactly the conversation that I should have with them. And, I'm going to have it. I just saw a tweet thread from someone in the data sphere who's a little bit controversial, but I think she laid out a good, a questionable strategy, but a good strategy, and I've seen this with a lot of salespeople as well. You often target people that either like, oh, they just had a Series B. They have money. So you're qualifying, do they have money? Yes. 2, they're at a certain point where they have certain problems, right? So, hey, Series B probably needs more metrics to go to the next round with VCs. Also just, the VCs are probably asking for certain metrics. They have money, how to deliver those things. You can have a very curated email that's like, hey, congratulations on your Series B or something like that. I'm sure you're dealing with certain metrics. I'd love to talk and have a conversation there. So it's a little more targeted. There's, again, similar example I saw on Twitter yesterday where it was like, hey, I know you're working with these companies. I think these companies have these problems. I can solve those problems. We should have a conversation. And that's, for some people, they're really good at having that ability and finding and knowing where leads can come from. Do you think that there are any pros and cons to consult in data engineering versus software engineering? I mean, yeah, I don't know. Whichever you're good at, you should do. Software engineering, I think consulting probably ends up more likely contracting work. I think data engineering, because there's an analysis component and as well as kind of some infrastructure setup, there might be a little more opportunity to do traditional consulting. Yeah, I don't think there's huge pros and cons. I think the interesting space to consult in on the software side is DevOps. I've seen people consult there. I think that's more fun. Need to launch their services, right? Like there's plenty of software people. There's plenty of people who can code. There's not a lot of people that are really good at then deploying that code in a production environment. So there's I think a big opportunity in the DevOps space for consulting. And I've seen a few friends of mine kind of go into that space and do really well because it's it's kind of this hard space to be in. You kind of have to have 5 to 10 years of experience to be good at deploying software, really good. And most people don't have that. So I think it's an interesting niche. What do you think? I'm trying to think. What do you think of someone who wants to master the whole pipeline of data science, like data engineering, data sciences, so he can deliver a solution end to end? Give me the problem, I give you the API. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you can deliver an end to end service for someone, always valuable. It's hard to be an expert in all of it, right? Like maybe you will, maybe you won't. You'll probably just be an expert at delivering an end-to-end solution, which is also, very much valuable. And if anything, at some point, the world you can eventually step into is out of this, I'm going to deliver it for you, and into, I'm going to tell you how to deliver it because I know all of the ins and outs. I've done it for, 5-10 years. You can hire someone to actually do the work or hire 2 people to do the work. And that will be the best opportunity for you. And that's when you get into what people would call real consulting, right? Real consulting, right, is more about just giving advice. This is why some people are like, what do consultants do? It's well, technically they just give advice. A lot of the work, I think, especially if you're technical, we end up doing is what people would more consider contracting, because we just do kind of the work. Whereas consultants are here's our perspective, pay us a ridiculous amount of money for an opinion. So there's goods and bads to that. I like being a little bit of both because I think the real value comes when you're a little bit of both, right? You're not just, here's my opinion, find someone else to do it. Also, let me just do the work that you tell me to do. But if you're kind of the person that says like, hey, here's the work I think you should do, um, and I'll deliver it to you, like I think that adds a unique value. Um, as companies get bigger, they really kind of do look for like individual consultants for everything. Like I've been on a project where my only goal for that project was to look at what the client needed, give requirements, and then they took those requirements and handed it to a SI, so solutions integrations or implementation partner, and they did it, right? Like my job was purely to be like a third party that gave an opinion, and then I also like judged the different proposals from people that came in against those requirements. So I was like, oh, this is a weird project. I really did something but didn't do anything, and it's an interesting side to be on. How would you like to offer around $100 for a small paid lecture project to get a job? I'm not sure what this is asking. How would you like to offer around $100 for a small paid lecture or project to get a job in the absence of a data engineering project? I'm not 100% sure of what you're asking, so you might have to clarify that. Let's see. As a data engineer living in Canada who cannot legally work in the States, do you think it would be a problem doing remote consulting for US clients? I am not a lawyer. So I'm not gonna like fully know the answer. I have worked with clients externally to the US. It's usually been fine. Again, I have no idea what Canada. I've worked with clients in Canada, for example. I don't know what the laws are. It does make me a little stressed sometimes about getting paid. So I always want to make sure I'm getting paid when it's from external, just because it's like, is there an extra layer? Sometimes people have like US credit cards or something that they can kind of pay, or US bank accounts that make it easier. I think that's usually where it gets tricky. It's like, where does the bank account lie? So that's why I mean, like, I hope I can get paid. So I'm always trying to figure out, like, okay, if you do this, how do I get paid? So yeah, I mean, I'd imagine if you live in Canada, you can probably work with US clients. But again, I'm not a lawyer. Talk to a lawyer on that to fully understand, like, what are the limitations on can you work with clients externally from your country. So yeah. Yeah, and again, feel free to keep asking questions. I'm going to quickly just check something. Oh, I see my girlfriend just seen that there's a live. I'm just going to say, I'm just waiting for more questions, and then also just catching up on a quick text. And then also I saw some confusing Slack message earlier. Where was that? I just want to see, where is this message? Here. Okay. All right. Let's see. Any new questions? No new questions? Yeah, I'll kind of, I guess, recap some of the stuff that we've been discussing. Again, this discussion has been around pricing. Pricing is kind of interesting. I'm writing an article about this around vendors, because how you price says a lot on who you're trying to make your client, or who you want your clients to be. That's why, eventually you actually start saying no to clients, because eventually people are like, hey, well, can you do a project for a low number? And you're like, well, I used to, I can't anymore, because I'm trying to, get clients at a larger number. Maybe if you're in a slow period, you take it on. But if you're consistently getting clients that are larger, you're going to continue to try to keep getting those projects, because that's where you're positioning yourself. That's the kind of projects you want to continue getting. Also, I think once you start getting bigger projects, it seems like there's generally a better chance for referral, right? Smaller projects generally come from, like, I say mom and pop, but I mean, like, smaller companies. And those companies are generally owned by a single owner, and you're going to do that work like once or twice, and then that owner is never going to leave. They're always going to be owning that company, and maybe they never need extra work. Whereas if you do projects at larger enterprises or mid-market companies, an engineering lead or a chief marketing officer, or whoever you worked with may end up leaving and asking you to come do that work again somewhere else. So, that's also kind of nice when you start repositioning your project overall. This is an interesting question. How do you feel when a project fails due to a management issue? Even if you're not responsible, you use I, but if I'm not responsible for the fail, I still do not feel good. Yeah, I mean, like, failures in projects, or even projects that, like, maybe technically succeeded, but failed in the terms of adoption, which is arguably a failure too. But like, no one's working with the tool that you've built. That never feels good, right? Like no one likes failure. You regardless of how much money you make, I think, especially if you're an engineer, you like the feeling that what you do is useful, right? Like you like feeling like, hey, I built something and people are using it. Right. Like I spent time, like my time, which is arguably the most valuable thing that all of us have, was put into something that is continued to be used. Right. Like, especially if you're like a pure engineer, right? Like I built a bridge. People use that bridge every day and have an easier life because of it. And same thing with code, right? Like it's like, hey, I built a software service, I built a tool, people use it every day, it makes me feel good. But if a project fails and you still get paid, it's still a bummer because you're like, well, I can't point at work that I did and be happy anymore, right? Because that work doesn't matter. It no longer exists, or it exists but no one uses it. So yeah, no one feels good, I think, in that situation. This is funny. Will you have a live session on ChatGPT and maybe talk about how it would be a benefit effect towards data engineers? That'd be interesting. That's an interesting prompt or idea. I'll just have a conversation with ChatGPT the entire time, asking if it will take over our jobs. I know a few people have put together not lives but videos with ChatGPT. That's an interesting, I think, conversation to have. But yeah, I'd be curious. Maybe haven't thought about it. It'd be fun to kind of play around with it for sure. What is the average hourly rate for AWS DE work? That is, very dependent number. It could be $200 an hour. It could be $20 an hour. I'm sure no one does $20 an hour. Maybe some people do $20 an hour, but it's going to be very dependent about where you live and the clients you're working for, right? If you're in the States, yeah, you could easily probably see upwards of $200 an hour. Elsewhere, I'm unsure. I know the UK doesn't pay as much, for example, for technology as people pay in the States. But yeah, it's going to be very dependent upon where you live. But yeah, so it's just a hard question to answer. Yeah, that's funny. I used ChatGPT yesterday to debug Cloud Composer. Did it work? I'm curious. What was the problem? I always want to know. Like, I've definitely poked at ChatGPT occasionally. I tried to get it to convert some JavaScript into Python. It didn't work, but it was it close? Sort of, not really, sort of. It was pretty close though. I'd say it was pretty close. It was like 70% of the way there. I need to go back and do a lot of the work, but it got me going. It got a lot of it started, which is always a lot of work. It did not work. I haven't slept. Oh no, I don't. Did you not sleep because it didn't work and you had to fix it yourself? Yeah, it's still getting better. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, we'll give it a few years, I assume. It could be like, again, self-driving cars where we're just stalled out for the next little bit as we try to make that next breakthrough. Or maybe ChatGPT 4 is just going to be the, that thing that like pushes us to that next S curve, so to speak. In its current state, ChatGPT is not good enough, I'd say. Again, it gives wrong information. It doesn't perfectly work. So it's getting somewhere. The other question is monetization, obviously. Like, hey, even if we have this model, we still need to monetize it. So ChatGPT to me is like someone who has read Designing Data. I can ask the bot anything regarding distributed computing. Yeah, but that's I'm always curious if that's helpful or not, because like you could technically go on the internet and find that information. The thing that it does that I would say is helpful is find the signal in the noise, right? Because oftentimes there is so much information on the internet. The problem is you have to find the right information on the internet, and I think that's definitely one place that maybe it could be helpful is finding the right information that you need at that moment based on your prompts. Um, but as currently, it still has, I think, plenty of way to go. Like I think I'd be interested in seeing things like Copilot, like GitHub's Copilot, uh, being applied towards a specific company. Like, what if I could put it onto my company's code base or my company's like all previous SQL statements we've ever ran, and then start building models off that, or not models, but building like results off of that. If the model was good enough where I could fine tune it to that rate and that level, that would be, I think, really cool. Because then you can literally tune it to be your company's kind of Copilot. And then, if you're writing a SQL statement that's already been written, it will just automatically, be like, finish it for you. And it's like, oh, the SQL statement already exists. I don't have to write it. And that could be a huge time saver. And I think that would be a very interesting idea for me, is just to see it very finely tuned towards a specific company's basically use cases. We'll see. Yeah, I'm very curious on that. How can I, a data professional consultant to companies in the US, do? Oh, okay. So you're talking about data laws. I mean, it's very hard. You might be able to do it as long as things are in the cloud, right? Like if things are not in the cloud and you have to deal with like VPNs and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Again, all the legal laws and things when things get out of the US. So. In the US, I can tell you, out of the US, much harder. Do you like Snowflake or Snowflake Warehouse? It has its very good uses. I think there are plenty of good tools. I obviously lean towards it, but I don't think it's the only solution that exists. BigQuery is great. Postgres is great in the right situations. A lot of people run towards Snowflake immediately. Honestly, I've seen people do a great job answering and having dashboards with a replica, like Postgres instance of their application database. So they just make a replica and report off that. And it works, right? Like if you can make queries off that and it works, and you don't need to hire an analyst, or you're not looking to build a huge, fancy, complex data model or something. Yeah, why not just do that? So yeah, it's a very specific tool. I think one thing I really forgot that of why I liked Snowflake was I had a client recently who is on SQL Server, and they were almost out of space. And it was like, oh yeah, I forgot that you can run out of space on a database moment. It's like, oh, I haven't run into this issue for like 6 years. Not just because I've been using Snowflake, but also, using things like Presto, where your storage is kind of in like not S3, but kind of an S3 or HDFS kind of file storage system, right? Like you almost forget you can run out of space to that degree. So it was very funny. Yeah, BigQuery is great. BigQuery is great. It's got plenty of traction. I'm only 2 months into my studies. How many years of experience would you generally suggest before entering consultancies? I mean, I'd say don't rush, right? Like there's no rush. I'd say again, I talked about this earlier. Once you've got a year or two of experience, you can start kind of taking on some basic projects just for fun, like just to get comfortable. There are plenty of projects that exist out there that are, again, very mom and poppy, and they just need some basic help. Maybe a basic dashboard, maybe just a simple Excel. It might not even be involve building a whole data warehouse. It might just be you pulling some things into Excel and answering some questions for them. And yeah, you could work for those projects. They're very small, but it's something that could be very interesting to them. And then you are slowly gaining new experiences. You're learning how to deliver projects. And so, yeah, you don't have to have 10 years of experience to consult, but you're just going to be doing different sizes of projects and different levels of projects. And you get comfortable that way. So, yeah, I mean, you don't need decades of experience to be helpful to some people. Some people just need someone that's just out of college to give some advice. I mean, honestly, when you look at some of the big consulting companies, that's all they do anyways, right? They'll hire a bunch of 23, 24-year-olds out of college who's maybe got a year or two of experience, pay them $80,000 a year while they're charging, $200 an hour for their time as senior consultants when they've just started. So, I wouldn't get too caught up on having decades, but You should have some. You should be useful, obviously. I think that's the biggest key. It's like, be useful, be helpful. As long as you feel like you can provide some value, don't feel like you have to have a certain number of time. It's just going to be, you're going to slowly grow and learn what size projects you can take on. And that's the tricky part. Like, okay, what projects should I be doing? What is the most common request of project that you get? I have two categories of projects that I generally get a lot of. One is what I like to call key person dependency issue type projects. These are projects that someone else built something, right? That person, or it was a team, left, they quit, and now that stuff still exists, right? Like data pipelines, data infrastructure, whatever. But it doesn't work anymore, or it never really fully worked, and no one knows how to fix it. So that's one common issue, right? Like coming into that space, fixing issues that someone else left behind. The second space is kind of greenfield projects. So, hey, nothing's been set up before. We need help setting things up. Can you help us start from scratch and build something? So those are the two most common consulting projects I get. One where I've got to reverse engineer everything, and the other where it's more like starting from scratch. I'm starting to get more high level strategic projects. So it's like less on, hey, build this thing for us, and more on, hey, can you give us advice on how to build this thing? We have talent. We just need, some of your time. I think that's kind of where I'm trying to push towards. Like, I always want to do hands-on projects, but when it comes to like getting paid, the higher up you kind of go on that strategy level, and you just get paid more because you impact more. Instead of like your decisions impacting just you, your decisions now impact the 3 people that they're going to hire to build this thing. So the projects in themselves might somewhat be smaller because you're doing just high level work, and so people aren't going to want to pay you hundreds of hours a month, but they're going to pay you more for a shorter window of time. So that's kind of been my goal, is to kind of go up that, right? The example I often give is like, well, level 1 of, let's say, like marketing consulting is like writing blogs for people. And then like the next level up is like writing blogs for people and creating like a content strategy for people, like when they should be writing things. And then level 3 is like just purely writing like what people should be writing about, and then maybe managing those people. And so that's how you kind of grow there. Let's see. Tips on starting out on Upwork as a beginner, and how can I choose projects that I can be sure I'm able to deliver, and what type of projects? I mean, the biggest tip on Upwork, right? Like the hard thing about Upwork is it basically commodifies you as a consultant, or your work as a contractor, right? Because you've got to now compete with people who are willing to work for as little as possible, and everyone's kind of going the wrong direction in pricing. They're like, hey, I have to compete with all these people, so I have to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, to a degree, right? Especially when you first start out. It's more when you first start out. You have to stand out somehow, so you have to like be cheaper than all the other people. So that's kind of step 1. It kind of sucks. You have to kind of be cheaper, get a ton of good ratings, and then, hike up your price, right? Charge a premium. That's kind of the best strategy I think I've seen on Upwork. The other thing is, in terms of like projects you can deliver, that's going to come down to your skill set, your background, what you can deliver there. So that's a little harder to say. Let me just check something. Is MS Power BI the most prevalent graphic software? What are the 2 best known? Well, the 3 best known, I'd say, are Tableau, Looker, Power BI. Will that still be the case in a few years? I don't know. Like, there's a ton of computer solutions that are trying to come into take places, so to speak, but those have been really hard to replace. I think Power BI and Tableau are definitely probably the most popular, and Tableau is like 20 years old at this point, but people still build on it. It's just interesting. I always find that interesting that it's still around. But Power BI, there's a ton of consulting that can be done. If you're looking for like specific consulting advice, tons of people need Power BI consulting. Power BI is interesting because it's like, because it has DAX, because it has all these like complexities, it makes it a great consulting opportunity because people are like, oh, it's so hard to use. You better hire someone like who's good at it to use it. Same thing with Looker. Because Looker has LookML, you have to almost hire a consultant or a specialist to do it well. So it's a consultant's like whatever dream. Yeah, we'll just say dream, so to speak, because it's like, yeah, great, perfect. It's complex, very nuanced, but you still want it. Great, I can charge money for it. That's good and bad personally. Like, I'm not a huge fan of like putting tons of DAX expressions everywhere. I like trying to put as much logic as I can in one layer. So, but again, it makes for a good consulting opportunity because of that. What are some red flags? What are some red flags for when deciding if you want to accept a project or not? And second point, I'm curious about how your portfolio expands. Portfolio expands better through referrals or other means. Oh, okay. Red flags. I'm often a little concerned when a client says a previous consultant worked on this and then they left, mostly because it is so difficult for consultants. Not difficult, but it takes time to get a project. And so if a consultant leaves, it's like, why did the last one leave, right? Like, are you hard to deal with client? Are you difficult? Like, what's the 411 here? Why did the previous consultant leave? I think another thing I don't like, and I get that budgets exist, but like too much emphasis on we don't have money or something is like always a little concerning. Especially when you can look them up and be like, I know you have money. You're either a large company or someone who's recently got funding. Just because that's more of a mentality thing to some degree. Like, obviously everyone wants services as cheap as possible. But, on the flip side, the people providing the service need to get paid, right? I was like, well, I still need to get paid. I understand your company might have problems, or your company might mentally not want to pay people. That's great. I can't work for free, so I would like to get paid. So I think those are some interesting red flags I've felt or seen people have. Also, sometimes just company types too. Like, oh, this company is kind of unethical because you know what they do. And in terms of where I grow, I think I need to do an analysis on like what are referrals and what aren't. I'd say it's not referrals, although those are what I like about referrals is they tend to be the highest like yes rate, right? Like the highest people close rate, so to speak. But I think I get a larger number of leads via content, and then maybe there's more of them that close, but like if I have 100 on one side and only 10 close versus 10 on the other, but 8 of them close. There's pros and cons to both sides. Modeling LookML, should data engineer build it or should it be a different team that focuses on LookML? I mean, company size will determine that answer. If the company can afford a LookML person, they'll hire a LookML person. If the company can't, then yeah, it'll probably be the data engineering team or analytics engineering team that does it, right? It's gonna come down to company size there. Yeah, and maybe a little bit about governance as well, like data governance. Are there any startup options other than consulting for data engineers? Any startup? I don't know what you mean there in terms of are there any startup options other than consulting for data engineers? Like, are you saying like to get started in becoming a data engineer or something like that? I'm not 100% sure what you're asking there. So maybe if you can just clarify that a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, it's what am I trying to think? I think we're at 9 o'clock, so I think I'm gonna wrap up here. But I appreciate all the questions. Hopefully you guys found plenty of helpful advice throughout this video. I'm gonna kind of wrap up and start getting on with the rest of my day. Hopefully you all have a good day wherever you're at, whether it's in the morning, evening, night. I wish you all the best, and I will talk to you guys next time. So thanks so much for jumping in here. I'm going to wrap this up and start heading off and doing work. And we'll try to keep doing some of these here and there. So I'll keep you guys in the loop. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.